Live from historic Fort Andros in downtown Brunswick, your way to wake up on the Midcoast. The Midcoast Morning Buzz. Richard Kazimer, Jim Blycamp, Radio 9, WCME.
Tomorrow night at the Chocolate Church in Bath, the audience will be treated to some wonderful music by Chris Norman and the Chris Norman Ensemble. Chris was born in Halifax, Nova Scotia. He began his formal musical studies at the age of 10 doing classical flute, but his music is all about Canadian maritime music, the influences of Scottish, Irish, French, and Canadian styles. And Chris, are you on the phone with us today?
Yes, I am.
How are you, sir?
Just fine, thank you.
I can imagine you making your way down in a station wagon from Halifax, and you probably pulled over in Castine somewhere getting some clams for your trip all the way down here to Bath. Is that true or not?
That's actually not far from the truth. Yeah, and you'll recognize us because we'll have a bass case strapped to the top of the station wagon.
Roadies must love you because you only have a flute.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's talk about the music now. In your biography, it says that you studied classical music. You started at 10 years old, and like a lot of people, especially in rock music, they study classical whatever, and then they see the dark side, and then they go off and do something else and make tons of money and are very successful. Your influence is now the Maritime Canadian music, which is, Scottish, Irish, and that whole Acadie of the French Canadian styles that I grew up with here in Maine. The whole Acadian driftwood came through here on its way down to New Orleans, and we still have that deep heritage here. And the jigs and the reels are very much of New England, especially Maine culture. And for you to be continuing this is just amazing and very commendable. Tell us about your influence on that.
Well, I should say, even though the biography says that I studied some classical flute, the fact was, my first musical experiences were listening to my parents, and they were both Maritimers, and my dad played the piano, and we sat around the piano and sang, Newfie songs, and so, I feel that I've spent my whole life really steeped in these musical traditions, as you mentioned, a lot of Irish, a lot of Scottish, and the French Acadian music. And it's just been a lifelong love and a passion of mine, and I look forward to sharing it, with the audience there in Bath.
Now, do you write your music, or is this traditional music? Do you write any new songs as well?
Yeah, it's a mixture. I enjoy really exploring the roots of the tradition. That means going back to some of the older tunes and some of the older songs. So in addition to playing the flute and the bagpipes, the small bagpipes, I also sing a few ballads as well. And so playing traditional tunes, older tunes, but also composing new music that's inspired by these traditions.
I have a cut here that you recommended to us. It's called Lend Me Your Loom Lass. Now, is this one of yours, or is this a traditional song?
It's traditional. It's Scottish. It's quite old, but as you'll hear when you listen to it, we've adapted it and arranged it heavily to try to bring it to life.
Well, what I've done with this is I've taken the liberty of, because it's a 7-minute cut, what I did was I edited this down, so we've got about 2 minutes, and it starts off very melodic, very low, very slow, and then builds into a reel at the end that is very toe-tapping. Now, what's the background of this song?
Well, it comes from a collection that was published way back in the 1700s, in the early 1700s in Scotland. And a lot of this music made its way to this part of the world, primarily in Cape Breton, where there's a high density of Scottish culture and people that appreciate and play Scottish music. But it was collected in a book by a fellow by the name of James Oswald. But at that point, it was traditional. I presume there were words to it. And Will You Lend Me Your Loom Lass, I have a feeling really doesn't have anything to do with the production of textiles.
That was going to be my next question. I'm glad you answered it. Let's give this a listen for a couple of minutes. That's Will You Lend Me Your Loom Last by Chris Norman and Chris Norman Ensemble. Now, Chris, did you add the last reel to that? Was that your production? Was that your influence on that song?
No, that's part of the tune. It's a pleading air and then a lively, energetic reel at the end.
That is smoking. Now, this traditional music, it must be difficult because I can imagine not a lot of this was actually written down in sheet music, so it has to be passed on from generation to generation. Is that not true?
That's exactly right, and I think that's part of what gives the music, it still retains a very social quality to it. People get together and play this music socially, in their homes and jam sessions and so forth. And I think it makes the music particularly vivid, and because it's not written down, encased, and it's something that's constantly evolving as it's passed from one person to another. And as you can hear there, we're putting our own spin on this music, but it's not easy to. I mean, it's not difficult to make something wonderful when you've got something that's been honed over hundreds of years of Darwinian music passing along,
Is there fear that something is lost in the translation through the generations, or is that just part of the organics of the music itself?
Oh, I don't think so at all. I think the music only benefits from that kind of polishing. It would be interesting to hear what people were doing with it 100 years ago or 200 years ago, when it was first jotted down. But what makes it special is the musician's ability to capture the essence of what's in the tune and to try to make it relevant for modern listeners.
That's just fabulous. You're doing a wonderful job at keeping this music alive. It is, again, it has such a deep heritage here in New England and also all over the country. I think this is something that we can all embrace. It's not overly produced. There's no lip syncing to it. So this is real hardcore roots music, and for you to be continuing this tradition is so commendable. You're going to be playing tomorrow night at the Chocolate Church in Bath. Tell us a little bit about the ensemble.
Well, it's myself, and I play flutes. That was a wooden flute you were hearing there on the recording, an instrument with an incredible range of expressive possibilities, and also the Scottish small pipes, and I'll be singing a few ballads as well. Joining me is guitarist Andy Thurston, who's one of the finest guitar players on the East Coast, particularly as it relates to traditional folk music, and a bass player, Chris Sabo. So it's a wonderful ensemble, and we've been playing together for almost 20 years at this point. So we're completely at ease with this music, and it's been quite a few years since we played in Maine. So I'm looking forward to bringing this music back home.
Well, we're glad to have you. Now, I have to ask you one more question. You were on the award-winning CD for the award-winning movie The Titanic. Your flute is heard throughout this movie. People at home are going to be digging out the DVDs and going to select scenes to hear your flute. Is there any particular scene that we can pick up your prowess on the flute?
Well, there were a lot of musicians and a lot of flute players on that recording, but I was brought in to play the scene specifically where Jack, the main character there, when he wins his ticket and he runs onto the boat across the gangplank. I'm playing in there, and there's another scene right after he sketches Kate Winslet down in the cabin there, and the butler comes in and chases them out and chases them down the hall, and they're in the elevator, and then they run through the engine room and wind up in the back of that car. And
I knew it!
That's me playing through that whole bit there.
I knew there was sex involved.
Yes, exactly.
Well, good for you. Chris Norman, safe travels, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow night at the Chocolate Church in Bath. Chris Norman Ensemble, again, you do some fantastic work. Safe travels, brother. We'll talk to you again.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
We're going to play us out with Highland Dancers from Chris Norman. That's a song called Highland Dances. That's by Chris Norman. He's going to be playing tomorrow night at the Chocolate Church with the Chris Norman Ensemble, and it's just going to be some fantastic, fantastic music. Radio 9 WCME.